Each and every night, each and every day, for freedom I'ma fight, in each and every way. Each and every night, each and every day, for freedom I'ma fight, in each and every way. Each and every night, each and every day, for freedom I'ma fight, in each and every way. Each and every night, each and every day, for freedom I'ma fight, in each and every way. They killed Martin, he was leading with love. Knocked the Black Panthers off the map, you know they couldn't see us with guns. Fred Hampton in a pool full of blood. So many assassinations in the nation, we on the run. But I won't run no more, stand and fight in the war. Organize my troops to shoot the truth right through the court. Kicking the door when you lock me out. They see a score after score and they trying to stop me now, but they caught me round. Ain't no justice from the outside, that's only within. If more of our people see it that way, then we gon' win. I mean, we've already won, but fell in the victimhood. Disconnected, miseducated, and so misunderstood. Wish I could heal the world if I had one wish. Was pissed growing up, finding out Jenny's didn't exist. I beat with a fist in the air, like my sister with an afro hairstyle. And all black holding it down. Many families broken down from a systematic strategy. Diplomatic leaders colonizing nationalities. Evil tactics they practice attacking our humanity. History repeated itself and I see insanity. On the journey seeking for wealth and they want to manage me. Take advantage of my talents but not have me eat. I be in the grave before being a slave. Determined in my DNA we gon' keep breaking them chains. Because each and every night, each and every day.
Wake up, wake up. Good morning, freedom fighters. What's good with you? It's your boy, Rashad Turner. Welcome to the dark side of education, y'all. Good morning. Wake up now. Wake up, wake up. I know the kids are still asleep, but we up. We're getting ready for this next week ahead of us. It's been a long week, really. Hope y'all had a good week. Good second, third week of school. I know my daughter had a good week. Enjoying the learning. Enjoying the love, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about love or literacy, right? That's one of the things we're going to talk about today. We're also going to talk about the white power agenda of the teachers union. I like to call it the white power agenda because when you look at the makeup of teachers unions, whether here in Minnesota or wherever you're tuning in from, here in Minnesota, it's about 94% white people. And the agendas that they push lead to what we have here in Minnesota, worst in nation education gaps. So I'm gonna have a guest on, talk a little bit about her perspective on the teachers unions. But I want to start with love or literacy. I was watching a show a couple of weeks ago now, and there's a guy on there who was on Citizen Ed, Chris Stewart's show. Shout out to Citizen. We love you, man. But I was watching the show, and the guy, Chad, they got a project they're working on. Seemed like a pretty cool project. And one of the things they were talking about was love. How we need to make sure that our schools are filled with love. And as I was watching it, I was thinking to myself, as a parent, which do I prefer? Is it possible to have one without the other? Love or literacy? Now, when you think about schools your kids attend, schools our children are in, wherever you're at, I would assume that you could walk into a school building and you could ask the teachers in there, you could ask the educators in the building, do you love our children? And I would say an overwhelming number, if not all, are going to say, yes, we love each and every one of the children in this building. And we would accept that. I would accept that until I start to look at the disparities, the gaps when it comes to some of these schools. Now, I said my daughter had a great second week of school. She was learning. She felt loved. But I don't know if she would have felt loved if she wasn't learning. So that's what I want to talk about, right? When you look at, and I'm going to pull up some of this lovely data that we have here in Minnesota. When you look at a school like Hall International, which is in Minneapolis. Let's see if I can pull this up here. Here we go. So you look at Hall International School. And this is on our MinneapolisSchoolFinder.org site. Shout out to Great Minnesota Schools, my old partners. But you look at Hall International School. You see the academic rating there, persistently low performing. If you look at the demographics on the sidebar, you see that most of the children in the building are Black. So if you're walking to Hall International and you ask them, do you love our children? Again, they'd say yes. But the thing that I think about the most is our children learning. So you see the academic rating, persistently low performing, means they've been that way for a long while. If you look at students on grade level, right, proficiency, and I'll hover over it so you get a little bit more info, but 17% proficient in reading, 17% proficient in math. What do you think? Do you think the teachers and the educators at Hall International loved the children in that building? Would you feel like your child was loved if they were one of the 83% in that building who can't read? So that's the question, right? And again, as I was watching this podcast, watching the show, it just was something that stuck in my head. Do the schools really love our children if 83% of the children at Hall International School in Minneapolis can't read? And you might say, oh, well, that's just one school. Well, here, I'll show you a school in St. Paul, Maxfield Elementary School. If you go into Maxfield, and I know a few people at Maxfield, you go in there and you ask them, do you love our children? They're going to tell you, yeah. But once again, you're going to see that, let's say 82% of the kids in that building can't read. Love or literacy, y'all? Which do you prefer? Because I think, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this is because I think that schools do a great job, bad schools that is, they do a great job at making us feel it's all about the love. But I'll tell you, if my daughter was one of those 83% that couldn't read, I can guarantee you that I would not feel as if she was loved. Do we send our kids to school to be loved? Of course, we hope that they have teachers, educators in the building who care about them. But how much do you care about my daughter if you're not teaching her how to read? And you've seen the math proficiency was the same. So it's just like love or literacy. Right? How much love are you showing our children if you're not teaching them to read, knowing that a life for an illiterate person, think they say something like functionally literate, functionally illiterate. But what does that life lead to? If you can't read, how much success can you really have in life? How much love did you really receive in school? And good morning, Erica. And thank you for tuning in. All right, Erica's a parent. She's been through the system. She's seen how schools treat our children. So it's love or literacy, y'all. Which do you prefer? And again, of course, we want our children to be loved. Of course, we want that. But parents, when you walk into your child's building, your school building, or you're communicating with your children's teachers via Zoom or whatever tool they're using with distance learning, you got to start to ask these questions. How many of the children in the building can read? Because I've seen schools here in Minnesota celebrated for loving the children. And I could pull up Lucy Laney's data, right? You may have seen Lucy Laney on Care 11, loving the children. But if school's about learning and our children aren't learning, obviously based on the data, people love data so much until it shows us opposite of what our schools are telling us. Love or literacy? All right, Jesse says, love would mean high expectations and high rates of success. Exactly. And when you look at that data, Jesse, people that are tuning in, when you look at that data I just had up there, is that showing you that there's high expectations? It's obviously showing us that there's not high rates of success. So if you think about love or literacy, we cannot be fooled to think that we send our children to school only to be loved, or to think that if our children are in school buildings where 83% of the kids can't read, that love that school is talking about means anything, right? Do schools love our children if they're not teaching our children how to read? Right? Amber says, no, they don't. And it's obvious, right, Amber? I mean, if 83% of the kids in a building can't read, that community is doomed. That community is sure to have some of the highest poverty rates in that city. If you're in St. Paul and you think about where the highest poverty rates are, well, look at the schools in those neighborhoods. And people try to tell us that, we can't fix education until we fix these children, until we fix poverty. But we actually see that in the data, the schools are just perpetuating that cycle of poverty. The schools are creating generation after generation of illiterate children. And now some of us, we're adults now. So we have to step up as parents and start to ask the questions of what does love mean? What does it mean for a school to love our children? Literacy with some love, right? We have to have it. We can't be fooled by the dance programs or the arts programs or the news stories where they're talking about how much this school loves our children, but then they ignore the fact that 4 out of 5 kids in that building can't read. And when I say can't read, it's one of those things that, yeah, they might get through high school, get through the K-12 system, be able to read a few words. But them few words ain't going to get you through a job interview. Them few words ain't going to help you be all that you can be. You got your coffee, y'all? Your tea? It's the dark side of education, y'all. Not everybody's talking about it. Not everybody wants us to know about it. And I would say that there's one group of people in particular who most definitely don't want us to know about that data. But going even further, they want to do all that they can to make sure that data stays the same. And I say, I try to make sure I am reading as much as possible, listening to folks who have, been in this education space as much as possible. And I do that to learn, right? I do that to try to deepen my understanding, start to see things from a different lens. And when I've done that, the thing that I've realized over this past 4 or 5 years is that this one group of people, and they're a large group, they've got different little branches, if you will. I'm talking about the teachers' unions, y'all. Teachers' unions want to keep that data the same. They'll show up at protests. They'll have their signs, Black Lives Matter. But you see from that data, Black kids can't read. So how much do Black Lives matter if our minds don't matter? Right? How much do Black Lives matter if the teachers' union's policies are designed to keep Black educators out of the classroom? So we have to not only ask questions of our schools, we have to make sure we dive into the information. We have to make sure that we start to think about who's really behind our worst in nation education gaps, right? Because those ineffective teachers that I talk about, that the schools that I just popped up are obviously filled with ineffective teachers. But those ineffective teachers are kept in the classroom thanks to the teachers' unions. Every school building I've been in, district, the teachers in that building, they know who the bad teachers are. They could point them out. They could give you a laundry list of reasons why those ineffective teachers shouldn't be in the classroom. But then here you have the teachers' unions with their white power agenda who want to keep those ineffective teachers in the classroom, while teachers of color can't seem to stay in the classroom because of policies like LIFO, last in, first out. Now, this white power agenda of the teachers' unions is nothing new. But I'm going to bring someone on to the show who understands some of the new stuff that's happening, but also some of the history of the teachers' unions here in Minnesota. Now, before I bring her on, I have to say that here in Minnesota, we have folks who call themselves allies. We have folks who, get the signs, they put them in their yards. But some of those folks, that's as far as they go. Some of those folks, you know, they're not 10 toes down when it comes to education justice, when it comes to justice at all. But this woman right here, let me bring her into the studio. Lynnell Mickelsen.
Hi.
Oh, hey there, Lynnell. Good morning.
Can you hear me? Is my mic working?
Oh yeah,
Good,
hear you
perfect.
fine. Hear you just fine. Our hair is matching.
Okay, good.
Looking good.
Good.
Looking good. But Lynnell is a lifelong, you know, some would say progressive Democrat. I would just say she's 10 toes down for the cause, but longtime progressive Democrat. Her one of her bios, it says recovering journalist who spent nearly 2 decades as Minneapolis public school parent, and she's still active now in this space. I want to welcome you, Lynnell. Thank you for getting up early. I hope you had your coffee. I know we've been trying to connect for a while. Glad to have you. How you doing?
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Hey, tell the audience a little bit about yourself, will you, Lynnell? I mean, the thing I would say about you is that you're 10 toes down for justice. You know, I saw you at the Boycott Minneapolis Public Schools press conference, and I sent you a message after that, and I said, hey, it wasn't surprising to see you because you're always there, you're always on time, but it was great to see you. So I appreciate your partnership, but just sort of let the audience know who you are.
Well, I appreciate you and what Minnesota Parents Union is doing. You know, I'm an old lady now, but I spent 20 years as a Minneapolis public school parent, and I have to say, I kind of made my own journey. I didn't start out where I am. I mean, I came out as a complete defender of Minneapolis public schools. I live in Southwest Minneapolis. I've lived here for 30 years. I moved when I had two babies under age 2. And I think one thing that is to be understood in these issues is just how white people are so socialized to believe certain things. And so when my kids went to public schools, I was told that, and I had seen it, that, you know, the system worked great for us, but those Black families, so tragic. And they're either they don't care about education or their lives are so tragic they can't do it. And I have to say, I'm ashamed. I just kind of, you know, went along with that, and really supported them. Has really supported the public schools, and I still support public schools. I still support public education. But I was changed I went from being a defender, and then after years and years in the system, it's so clear how it works one way for white kids and another way for Black kids and other kids of color. But let's just talk about Black kids, because the system is the hardest on them and on Native Americans. And then I kind of became a reformer, like, let's fix this. And I think, so I was with a group of activists. We started, my kids lived through a big bunch of layoffs. And so I saw teachers, the best and the youngest teachers, laid off and almost always replaced by older white teachers who were really mediocre. And then we started getting teachers as the North Side schools closed down who came in, and I was already on teacher interviewing as a parent representative. And we heard the same thing from them. I was in the North Side for years. Those families just don't care about education. So tragic. And then we'd place them in Lake Harriet with almost all white classrooms. And we would find out that they just weren't very good teachers.
Yeah.
They weren't good teachers of white kids either. But somehow it was always excused for that. And that just kind of radicalized me. At the same time, the data from No Child Left Behind came out, and it's just, you know, I'm so old. I remember before the data was aggregated, and all of a sudden you see the data, and it's so systematic. There's just no way you can pretend that we're not looking at a systematic issue. And so we started challenging the teachers union on seniority, and it was mostly white parents. And I had Chris Stewart, shout out to Chris, always there. And we decided we would just focus on the teachers union because that's the one thing that nobody would ever talk about. That was the third rail. I'm a Democrat, and I'm a progressive, and that was one thing so we started sitting in on teacher union meetings and negotiations and pushing the district to actually ask for change. And the thing I think I didn't even realize then is how systematic this is, and that we can get rid of one tiny clause, but we almost never can, but then the whole system interlocks and supports it. So
Yeah.
I went from that to thinking we have a system that is built by white people for white people. And if white boys were failing, if only 20% of white boys could read, we wouldn't be talking about reforming the system. We would have remade it already to work
Already, right?
Yeah.
And,
So
and that's one of the things, Lynnell, sorry to cut you off. That's
No.
one of the things that we sort of battle with here in Minnesota, right? I mean, it's always someone's beginning the conversation. Oh, let's begin this conversation.
Yeah, right.
But you're describing like, hey, the conversation started years ago.
And before me, I started doing this. I would get these little notes from other activists who were 20 years older than me saying, good luck, girl. And they would show me. I remember seeing a picture that Gary Sudduth, or a speech that Gary Sudduth of the NAACP or Urban League had made 20 years before to the school board. And it was the same things we were saying.
Yes.
And it was just like, holy shit. So I think I've gotten to the point where I think we have a system designed by white people for white people. And like all institutions, unions, churches, corporations, they resist change. So I'm still very much down for public education. But the current system we have can't be reformed any more than a police union can be reformed. Right. And the links, the similarities between the teachers union and the police union, they're not the same thing, but there's some really disturbing similarities. And I think my problem with the teachers union, especially as a Democrat, is I live in a one-party town, my party, the Democratic Party.
Running everything.
And they run everything. And that union is in Minneapolis, it's 85% white for teachers. And statewide, it's 96% white. And its job is to represent its members. And they're very good at centering the whole system around its needs. So we have a system that is centered around the needs, comfort, and convenience of white women whose union gives to my party. And and it's not progressive. There's no way you can walk in lockstep with that and think it's progressive. And the system runs whether you're a nice person or an asshole. It doesn't depend on your niceness to have white supremacy keep working.
I'm gonna pull up a question here from Demond. That sort of flows with what you're talking about. Demond says, as a former principal in Philadelphia, it's criminal that some teachers are not removed because of their union. What are your thoughts on that? Right, you've been dealing with the union, you've been in the meetings. What on that, Lynnell?
We see the same thing. I had a longtime teacher once tell me, and then she had been in the district for 30 years. She was one, and she said, look, whether you agree with her math or not, she would say 50% of the teachers in Minneapolis right now are exactly who we want to have in front of our kids. They show up every day with their A game. They're willing to try their best. 30%, she said, are really mediocre. Maybe half of those could be better if they had a better attitude, better principle, better training. The other half are always going to be really mediocre. And 20% have no business being in the classroom. Right. So the good news is you have 50% that you could probably work with, maybe 65%, but you got 35% that you probably can't.
Get out of there, yeah.
And then and that's going to inevitably weaken a system. Yeah, and so we saw countless situations where these teachers should not be in the classroom anymore. For example, we had a couple of years ago when I was watching negotiations, you are by law able to be in public union negotiations. And so it's like watching paint dry on a wall, but I sat through hours and hours of them. And there was a case where like in Minneapolis, there's teachers that nobody wants. And at the very end of the school year, before the school year starts, you have to place them. But at least in Minneapolis, you're supposed to have an interview with your principal. At one year, we had 141 teachers who refused to be interviewed. It was like, I got a right to a goddamn job, and you just better put me in a school.
Give it to me, right?
And so the district was saying, can we please fire teachers, remove them from the payroll if they won't even submit to an interview? And the union was just shocked. They said, no, that's wrong. And I actually lost my cool. I'm supposed to just observe. I said, why would you oppose that? And they said, because maybe some people don't believe in interviews. Maybe, and then they said, maybe interviews make them uncomfortable. And then the final thing was, maybe they're on vacation in Amsterdam. I'm like, Amsterdam, where did that even come from? But anyways, that's the level. And I don't think white progressives and white Democrats want to look at this because it's their allies. But it's just as wrong as it is in a police union and as anything else. And it's also white women. It's not all white women, but it's 75% white women. And with white women, we're really tied to our innocence and our purity and our goodness. And that's what's going on.
What are your thoughts on, LIFO has been a big issue lately with Miss Hassan, the Burnsville public teacher, schools teacher that was fired. What are your thoughts on LIFO? But you've mentioned a couple of times that our progressives here in Minnesota, they're just lockstep with the teachers union.
Right.
Thoughts on LIFO, but also how do we get progressives to get to where you're at, right? Even if they don't get to where Lynnell's at, how do we get them to move, especially thinking about things like LIFO?
Well, LIFO is just a way we just keep our teachers as white as Minnesota snow. I mean, we lay off some of our best and our brightest, and we always lay in the last hire, which is going to be teachers of color. The last new union negotiation, the Minneapolis Teachers Union said they were willing to to protect teachers of color from LIFO. And I was like really stunned because we had been asking for that for a long time. And the district's response was, that won't hold up in court. So thanks for sharing, but we're not allowed. Any teacher who is laid off because a Black teacher was retained could take that under case law and go into court and get their job back. And I'm cynical enough after years of watching teachers' contract negotiations to believe that the union knew that it wasn't legal. So you propose it anyways, and then you say, so you have to get rid of LIFO, period, not just LIFO with exceptions for Black teachers. You just get rid of LIFO.
And I know there's going to be some action at the state level this next session around possibly putting in some protections for teachers of color, right? When it comes to LIFO, but more importantly, just a way to keep teachers of color in the classroom, right? The static or the pushback always seems to come, and this was a shock to me, right, Lynnell? I mean, my grandmother, she's a Democrat. My Nana's a Republican, but my grandma's who I grew up with, right? And every day I'd hear her talking about the different, things she was doing with the DFL party, right? And when I think about my grandmother, I think about someone who's truly progressive,
right?
Wants the best for everyone, has a big heart, but is also logical in her thinking, right? But when we get down to the Capitol, it always seems to be your DFL friends who have the most pushback.
What
do you, how do you discuss education reform with your friends, family who are progressives and they might not be where you are at?
It's always hard. And, I also grew up evangelical fundamentalist. And so it was like, either you believe every word of the Bible is true or none of it's true. And so either you believe every word of that teacher's contract or you hate unions or you hate teachers. And so this binary thing is always brought up to either you're with us or against us. And I just think especially white progressives need to realize that the system, which was always based on white supremacy, is even more untenable now that I think in the whole city of Minneapolis, it's basically between 38 and 42, depending on your 5-year average white. So it's a majority kids of color. And so when we have politics that are completely centered around the needs of a membership that's 85 to 95% white, and we center all the needs of the school around those people, it's always going to be problematic. It's not progressive. It's bullshit. Yeah. But that's where power is power, and also I think the difference between the police union and the teachers union is a lot of it's the same bullshit. But the cops, the Bob Krolls are aggressive and they're assholes. Yeah. I tell you, teachers are really, really nice, and it's a nicey talk of compassion and we're with you, but it's the same bullshit. It's the same centering. It's the same centering around white women, especially. It's around white women, and white women are really, they do white women cheers, and we're used to be centered. And the other weird thing, Rashad, and maybe I shouldn't even bring this up, but underneath all these conversations I have with women and with white progressives is the 400-year tradition of being told to be afraid of Black people and Black boys. And it's not even conscious, or it's just like in the subconscious. And you think you're having a normal conversation about education. Suddenly you take a step and the river is really deep and cold. And what is that? That's a 400-year tradition of white women innocence and purity and Black male predators. And that is an undercurrent of our education discussions. And we need to start calling it out. But when you call it out, people just freak. No, and then you're told that and the other problem is that I am a Democrat. I don't seem to have a party when it comes to education, but there's no way I'm voting Republican. Just no way. Right. And so it's hard these are hard issues.
And it's one of those tough things, right? I mean, dealing with and just sort of thinking about the politics of education, right? A lot of people don't know, but down at the Capitol, when it comes to like lobbying, K-12 lobbying, I mean, K-12 has the most lobbyists out of all of the areas. And it's amazing when you think about some of the things you're saying, right? It's these systems were built by white people for white people.
Yep.
And it's like we're in 2020. Times are much different than when these systems were built. You have folks who call themselves progressives, but yet we're in a state with worst in nation education gaps, right? So I want I want the audience to know. And Lynnell, one of the reasons I brought you on because it's much easier to listen to for some folks, right? For some folks, it's much easier to listen to a white woman talk about white women, right? But
right.
You also have an experience and expertise of dealing with the system, seeing the outputs of the system. And one of the things I want to shift to is, we currently have this system, this constitution that reads, we are, our right is to an adequate and uniform system of schools.
Uniform, right?
Uniform, right? It's all the same. And we've been working on, and I know you've been on some of the calls and strategizing with us. We've been working on Page Amendment, right? And I'm going to have President Kashkari and Justice Page on in a couple of weeks to really take a deep dive into that Page Amendment. But what are your thoughts on our children having a right to quality education here in Minnesota?
I think we need the Page Amendment because this system is going to need a whole bunch of different challenges to it so that we can introduce a model of public education that actually works. But it was interesting. I mean, I think the teachers union, pretty quickly came out. First, they stalled. Let's look at it and tweak the wording. And we've all been there with the teachers union, by the way. We're often told you can't call them out because you catch more flies with honey, and you can't talk openly about this stuff because you'll freak out all the white people and the white progressives. And they do freak out, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
So then we hedge our language and we try to make things acceptable, and no one knows what the hell we're talking about. And so, but it was just interesting that amendment comes from those guys, and who opposes it? Education Minnesota. Yeah. I was really surprised that Rena Moran stuck with it, and that Keith Ellison also stuck with it. I was really surprised, but that they were, then everybody just shuts up and goes back into lockstep. And I think we need to call them out. And it really is the whiteness. I swear to God. I mean, again, if 20% of white kids couldn't read, we would change the fucking system. Sorry, I'm not supposed to say that on a Sunday.
We're online. Oh yeah, it's a church day. No swearing on church day.
Okay, yeah, right.
No, let me check with the producer. Is that all right? The producer said the language is okay.
Okay, but I go to church, so I shouldn't be swearing on a church day anyways.
You better stop it then.
I'm going to stop it.
I appreciate the realness, Lynnell.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Right.
And that's why I think Minnesota Parents Union is actually really important, because I tried to organize white people and I either didn't do it right, and the times are changing, and there's more white people in Minneapolis who are moving into this, but ultimately the system works okay enough for most white kids and white parents, and people are busy and they're just not going to get into it. And I just really wish that some of the money that went into lobby would go into organizing what you and Kulia and so many good people are doing, because it's going to have to be, it doesn't have to be, but those are the people who have whose voices need to be heard.
Hey, I appreciate you, Lynnell, and it's you know, going back to Ed, Minnesota for a second.
Sure.
Right? It's going to be interesting, and I'm thinking about you speaking of the importance of parent voice, parents being at the table, parents being a part of the decision making. You've seen Education Minnesota, they stalled for a little bit on the Page Amendment, but then they came out and just with a bunch of distractions.
Right.
How do you think they're going to respond to Minnesota Parent Union, who wants to make sure parents have a seat at the table and have that representation? How do you think Edmund's going to respond to parents being at that collective bargaining table when the time comes?
Well, if they can't control you, they will demonize you. And so you're going to hear the usual thing about, shills for billionaires, privatizers, the whole rant.
Yeah.
And, it used to just really, I used to be kind of baffled by this, that in many ways, the teachers union, the way they demonize their opponents, the way they hate data, they're very much like Trumpists. They act like Trump people when they talk like this, and it used to baffle me because these are otherwise people I agree with. These are people that I vote with on the same issues. But this is what it looks like when we're defending white supremacy. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or Republican. That is what it looks like when you are defending white institutions and you're defending white supremacies. You will demonize, you will hide data, you will go through whatever it takes to get the focus off what is really being pushed and onto you. And it kind of, again, this institutional racism and white supremacies does not depend on your niceness. You can be really, really nice and polite and a good person, and you're still. Yeah, I think that's where the language of anti-racism is important. Either you're, what I'm doing binary too. Either you're for us or against us, but that's the systematic nature of it. And you can say LIFO has nothing to do with race. If you're a senior Black teacher, it protects you, but it does.
And there probably ain't that many senior Black teachers, right?
Right.
Because they don't make it.
Right. And the way we license teachers and the way the state of Minnesota, they'll say, we want more Black teachers, but they have to come up through our white institutions in Minnesota. And so at one point in the Minneapolis teachers contract talks, I heard the union say, we want the district to go recruit teachers from HCBUs. And I thought, well, that's great, but under Minnesota licensing law, we're not going to be able to hire them. And it's the union that creates that licensing law that blocks people. So if we really wanted Black teachers in the classroom, I like the Grow Your Own program, but we would need to be much more systematic. And who opposes that the most? Who blocks every legislative move? It's the teachers union. I mean, Mary Catherine Rickers, our commissioner of education, she used to be the #2 person in the American Federation of Teachers. She used to be president of the St. Paul Teachers Union. What a nice lady. Oh my gosh, so nice. And the data under her administration has gotten more and more obscure. It's harder to find what's actually going on. So you can just be super nice and vote for all the right causes and still really uphold a system that is killing Black minds. And we do it every day in Minnesota and in Minneapolis. And then we kind of say, aren't we such good progressives? So I think we need to call it out and just keep calling it out. I don't know how successful we'll be, but we at least have to call it out. We can't pretend anymore that it's not happening.
And I agree, right? And I think that with calling it out, right, there's folks who want to distract, who want to push us in a different direction. But your point about Representative Moran and A.G. Ellison sticking with the Page Amendment, even with the white supremacists of Education Minnesota talking about that we shouldn't have this, right?
I know, and that took guts, because those guys are those guys have been in there. They know exactly what the power looks like.
Oh, exactly.
It's fierce. I mean, it is fierce. You get shut out and shut down, and you understand. You've been on the anyone who's been on the receiving end of it knows what it's like.
I see the emails people send in like, oh, you guys got to shut him up. You got to shut him up. There ain't no shutting up the truth, right? The truth needs no defense. And when it comes to our education system here in Minnesota, when it comes to changing that, reforming that, tearing it down, building a new system, the biggest blockers are the teachers' unions.
It is. And I've lived through like where we can also demonize superintendents, and we can say, if we only had a better superintendent, but it's really, and we do need good superintendents, but the system runs independent of them.
Yeah.
It's just like the police department. I think we have a good chief in Minneapolis, but they're not under the command, and our rank and file are not under the command and control of our police chief or mayor. I would say we have a similar situation where we can yell at the administration. There's things that they do that I don't like, but in many ways, the whole system is kind of running automatically. And with these contracts and with this stuff, and it's really hard to undo. It's really hard to undo.
It is. It is. Just pulling up a comment here from Roger. Roger's one of my new Facebook friends, sending me some information, some articles and stuff. Appreciate you, Roger. Big tent, right? We got a big tent of folks who want to change education. Roger's comment, my understanding is that union reforms have been sought many times, but once it reaches legislators, it always gets slapped down. Roger, I think you're hearing Lynnell say it, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely what happens. And, one of the things we try to do at Minnesota Parent Union is get as many parents and students, just get families involved in what's going on, right? I was talking with a local board member yesterday, and that board member was just describing how the unions, they're pushing their narrative, and it makes it much harder to push back against those narratives when it's just all, white parents showing up supporting what the union's saying.
And here's the weird thing that makes it even more tricky. I mean, I actually believe, I actually do support unions. I just think we got a case in education where the power dynamic is way off. And so it's way off. And the system is completely tilted around not the needs of the people who are serving, but the needs of our employees and mostly white employees first. And so, and then there's things I agree with the unions at. So I've also sat in negotiations and thought, the district should follow the union lead on this because they're right. But overall, it's been a very destructive role at this point. And as the system is kind of slowly crumbling, just like any organization that's watching a system slowly crumble, they get more reactionary and more militant. And that's what's going on.
And it's one of, something you just said made me think of this, and I'll let you get to your Sunday. It's a beautiful day out there. It's almost winter time here in Minnesota, y'all.
It is, I know. Yeah.
Folks tuning in from other places. We got 80s coming up this week, but
but it won't last long.
Yeah, last long. But now, one of the things you said a second ago was just how the system is currently focused on adults.
Yeah.
Right. And when you said that, it made that Page Amendment pop back into my head. And that's what we want to do with the Page Amendment is shift that focus from the adults to our children.
That's right.
So now I appreciate all of the work that you've done for our children, all of the work and support that you continue to offer and do for the community. Thank you for coming on this morning. If you could send a message before you get out of here, if you could send a message to your fellow progressives here in Minnesota when it comes to education reform, what's the message you have for them?
That Black children are brilliant and that we are losing their brilliance. And It's a complete loss. And if Black lives matter in the streets, they matter in the classroom. And we can get so caught up in deficit thinking that we just stop remembering that we have these brilliant kids with greatness in them, and we are smothering them every day, and it's got to stop.
Has to.
Because they're beautiful and they are brilliant. There is greatness in our children. We need to let it out.
You ain't never lied.
Yeah.
Thanks again for coming.
Thanks a lot. I so appreciate the Parents Union and what you guys are doing. And let's just keep going.
Absolutely. Can't stop, won't stop.
Yeah. Right.
You have a good Sunday.
You too.
I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right, peace. So there y'all have it, right? Coming straight from Lynnell Mickelsen. She's a vet, right? She's been in the game for a long while now, right? And you heard her talk about that shift, right? How when she was just drinking the Kool-Aid and listening to what the district was saying, she was just going right along with it. And I bring that up because it's not always something we're going to just get overnight, right? It takes a little bit of time. But if we're intentional about what we're getting, right? If we're intentional about getting an understanding, we'll get there, y'all. Parents have power, right? And the system doesn't want us to know that. The system does everything it can to keep the information from us, to keep us thinking that they love us, that they love our children. But again, when you look at the data, and that data matters, right? That data matters because some folks will just look at that data as numbers on a piece of paper. But that data is really our children, y'all. So if we know that there are schools where 80% of the kids can't read, it doesn't matter that our child is one of the 20% that can. We have to make sure we step up, do what we have to do in order to make sure our children are getting what they need. Captain's not coming to save us, y'all. You hear me say that all the time. If we parents don't continue to step up, if we parents aren't at the table, the system will continue to do to us or do for us rather than with us. It's one of those things, right? We can sit back and we can trust this system. But why would we do that, y'all? We have to make sure we understand what we're trusting. We have to make sure that we are the ones setting the standard for what love is when it comes to our children and it comes to their education. Because if it's not us, you heard Lynnell talk about who it's going to be. It's going to be white people with the system that was designed for white people, by white people, as Lynnell said. And that's not going to work for our children. I remember one time a colleague of mine, she said, well, if 94% of the teachers in a building are white women, well, that means that they're teaching our children of color how to be white women. And that ain't going to work. for my black daughter. It ain't gonna work for your Native American daughter, for your Latina daughter. It's not gonna work. Let's see a comment from Jessie here. She says, and white parents need to step up in support of their black neighbors and the kids who the system isn't working for. You absolutely right. So when we think about grassroots, we think about parents, that's all of us. And I'm not talking kumbaya, right? Because we're not going to spend much time, if any at all, trying to bring along people who we feel like we got to teach them to love our children. I don't think that we can teach these white teachers to love our children. They love our children or they don't. I don't have one white friend who I had to teach to love me. Think about it. How many of your white friends, and I've got plenty of white friends, close friends, acquaintances, whatever, but I've never had to teach them to love me. So if our children are in schools where teachers have to learn to love our children, that means it's too late. It's too late. If you have a sixth grader, that means for about 6 years, they've been in a building, in a classroom, where that teacher hadn't learned to love them. If your child's in a building where 4 out of 5 kids can't read, how much love is in that building? Did you not teach that white teacher how to love your child? Is it even possible? Because the white teachers I know, we have deep conversations. We have real conversations. I've never had to teach them to love me. Love or literacy, y'all? What's more important? Love or literacy? I don't think you can teach them. The teachers, that is. I don't think you can teach them to love our children. But I do think that you can teach my daughter without loving her. But I also think that if you are teaching my daughter and she's learning, well, then you love her. Because we see the data where the love doesn't exist. We see what that data looks like. If I was to pull out my daughter's school, you would see exact opposite of that. 20% of the children who need a little extra support to be proficient. So when you have to choose between love or literacy, I hope you choose literacy, because with literacy is love. But without literacy, I don't think there's any love, y'all. All right. I appreciate y'all tuning in today. Just a reminder, quality is a must. Failure is not an option, y'all. If we don't do it, it ain't going to get done. This is the dark side of education. I'm your homie, your friend, the professor on Sundays. I appreciate the compliments on my hair. The hair's been too much work though, so I don't know how long it's gonna last. I haven't had to do my hair, right? And I feel you, Amber. I choose literacy. I feel you. We're in the same boat. But I haven't had to do much with my hair. I don't think this much in my whole life. See, every time I touch it, there's some leave-in conditioner on there. But I appreciate the compliments. I appreciate the jokes. Cisco in the house. Meteor Man. I love y'all. Have a good Sunday. Again, this is Dark Side of Education. We'll see y'all next Sunday, 10 a.m. Until then, God's peace and blessings, everyone.